time we reach the 1970s, there is a discernible shift within the demographic placement of voters. So voters are split fairly evenly between the parties. Um, African Americans in the early 1940s are voting about 50-50 Republican, Democrat. This is true of white people as well. This is true of Christians. That if you look at the demographics across the country, when you reach 1946, that you will see a country that split evenly within their demographic groups. The one fundamental difference, however, is the rural-urban divide. This divide began to emerge in the beginning of the country in 1789. Um, that this divide has always existed between rural and urban areas. It is a divide that still exists today. It is the most primary divider of politics. You can just look at a map and see that to be the case. That large cities tend to be progressive and democratic, and small urban or rural areas, farm towns where few people live, tend to be very homogenous, very conservative places. Um, but after the war and after the 1950s and the Red Scare, many people, especially minorities, began to say, hey, this un-Americanist, that's about us. That's about women, Native Americans, LGBTQ, the Chicana movement, the African American civil rights movement, the anti-war movement, the Asian American movement, that many minorities and young people began to rebel against this sort of strict conformity that was being placed on people as the sort of admissions ticket to being a good American. And and this created a real divide. And it is here in this moment that the political parties and political ideologies began to move, to shift, and solidify. And Nixon, seeing this in the 1968 election, he ran his campaign with a kind of racial dog whistle called the Southern Strategy, in which he went to the South and he appealed to the racial attitudes of Southern whites. And he declared that he would be engaged in a law and order presidency in which he would take care of all of these city dwellers, minorities, who are causing all of this problem. This is very comparable to the campaign of Donald Trump in 2020, in which he argued that Black Lives Matter protesters were going to come to people's suburbs and burn them down, and that he was the only person who was standing between white suburbanite women and these hordes of minority protesters. And he ran a law and order campaign, essentially dog whistle ideas about law and order, and that the real owners of law and order are white men. But if you looked at Richard Nixon and you looked at his policies, you would have a very hard time, I think, identifying him as a Republican. He was conservative for his time, but many people in contemporary America would consider him to be a liberal Republican. Some of the policies that would have made people like think, oh, well, that's a liberal, is that he backed affirmative action to create set-asides or partition places in colleges for African Americans, women, and other minorities, and also to give access to minority-owned businesses to government contracts. He also created the Environmental Protection Agency to protect the environment. The environment had long been the purview of progressivism all the way back to Theodore Roosevelt when he created the National Park System. And so by creating the EPA, many conservatives since have tried to kill the EPA, but the EPA was started by a Republican, by Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon also did something that a liberal could never have done, which was opened up China, went to China and met with their leaders. If a Democrat had done that, the sort of red baiting anti-Red Scare campaign that Richard Nixon was part of would have been attacked as pro-communist. But because he had that reputation of being anti-communist, his move into opening China was seen as like pro-American. Nixon also countered youth protesters, minority and just white youth, by claiming during his campaign that he had a secret plan to end the war in Vietnam. Of course, he had no plan, but that appealed to white voters who wanted to believe the war against communists was winnable. And and so this began to sort of move the sort of center of the country into the Republican Party. Um, but Nixon had the tendencies that of conservatives, uh, in that he believed that whatever methods he took uh, to gain power were necessary to stop un-American minorities from gaining control, and this led to Watergate. Um, that Nixon and the people around him uh, essentially justified what they did because they claimed that they were the true patriots and that they were just trying to protect the country from this overwhelming wave of minorities and radical hippies who were trying to change the country. Yes, we can see this whisper in the Nixon campaign, and it becomes part of a sort of underlying thread that will consolidate white religious conservatives into the Republican Party. Um, this was especially true since women had gained rights under the Civil Rights Act, and African Americans, and for many evangelical Christians, this was an assault on biblical teaching that women should be helpers. For the discussion, we can see these problems being meted out for women. And we can see the beginning of this. In the next discussion post and in the next reading, we will see how this group of people that attempted to stop women from gaining access to equality will become a group called the Moral Majority. That group will back Ronald Reagan, and it will essentially steer the Republican Party and conservatism in America into a highly ideological Christian party. This began in the 1950s, and it was a slow march to this space that America sits in today. And Phyllis Schlafly, along with Jerry Falwell, will become essentially the nucleus of the Moral Majority. And so you have Phyllis Schlafly, who wants to define women in biblical terms. And those biblical terms are her biblical terms. They are the biblical terms of white evangelical Christians. All right, bye.